to go in. That is the... Everybody in the world touched the pad and it should be used. So I've got the, let's take a little... Now then crew, and welcome to the Andy Mechanic YouTube channel, and I've got Tool Girl Holley back on site to give me a hand. Now in this video we're going to, following on from the normal steering rack that I pulled apart with Sam the other week, I've got a power steering rack here to pull apart, and we're not going to cover all the measurements that we did in the previous video. I'm going to really focus on the differences between a normal steering rack, non-power steering, and a power steering rack. And I mean a hydraulic power steering rack. Don't forget, quite a few modern cars these days have electric power steering, as do a lot of the quad bikes. They don't bother with the hydraulic system. They've gone straight into electric power steering, like the Yamaha, I don't know, most of the Yamaha quads now have got a power steering option, and they're all electric, as are many of the other brands of ATVs out there. So what makes up a hydraulic power steering system? Well, you've got, first of all, most of you should recognize this, you've got a reservoir, and on there you've got, you know, minimum, maximum marks and stuff, and you need one of those. And we've also got a power steering pump. Now there is a video already showing one of these pumps being pulled apart. I think it was off an old Ford Falcon or something. I don't know what it was. Is it a Ford Falcon? Ford make Falcons, don't they? Yeah, I think it was a Ford. I don't know. Anyway, but there is a power steering video already done covering the pump, disassembly, inspection, and basically the failure diagnosis. We've got a few pipes that join all the bits and pieces together, and what I'm going to do on the bench is basically plumb the whole thing up so that you can see the fluid flow external to the system, and then when we pull the rack apart and the rotary control valve, you should then be able to relate as to where the fluid's coming from and where it's going based on that full system. So, going out of shot there, sorry. What we've got here is the power steering rack out of the old RAV4. It's probably still going to drip some fluid around. And as you can see, it's quite different around the pinion area. And inside this bit here, do you want to point that out for us, this bit? Inside there is the rotary control valve, and its job is to direct the fluid to the correct side of the piston inside the rack to give you that assistance. And we'll show you how that works a bit later on. Okay, it's about time to get on the tools. You ready?
Yep.
Are you sure?
Yep.
Excellent. Here we go. Okay, so just to plumb up the system so we get an idea of what's going on, let's clamp the rack in the vise. If you open the vise up for us. Team Holley to the rescue. Okay, now we shouldn't, but we will. Let's just clamp it in there. I know we're going to get lots and lots of complaints. Ow, ow! Jeez. Go on you're right. I'm used to pain. Yeah, give it a good yuck. Right. Okay, so very quickly, just to run through, we've got the input from the driver through the steering column, steering wheel, onto the input to the pinion. Now on the old steering rack, that pinion shaft went straight down onto the rack. In here, it doesn't. They're two separate components, and we'll cover that very shortly. But to plumb it up, we've got, this is the pressure feed into the rotary control valve. So this has to come from the pump. And here is the pump. And you've got a banjo bolt on there, what's left of it. And a couple of washers, or all the washers, because that's fine. Don't need that. Okay, so that goes on there very roughly. You can do this. And we'll leave it a little bit loose so we've got a bit of movement, because the whole thing's all over the place. Right, so one pump, and the pump needs to be fed by fluid from the reservoir. So we've got the reservoir, and this is the feed pipe that supplies fluid to the pump. Because what you can't have is any air in the fluid at any time, otherwise it causes aeration, and of course you lose pressure by that, and you also get some pretty nasty noises out of the pump. It gets rather upset. So stick that in there, we are, onto the reservoir, and then lastly we've got one more pipe. It's a pretty simple setup. We've got this last pipe here that comes, basically it's like the return pipe off the rotary control valve. That goes in there, and then lastly that then drains back into the reservoir. Look at that, pretty good. Okay, so that is an entire hydraulic system for power steering. That's all you've got. Pretty simple. And the only pressurized hose in the whole system is this one here. These other ones, there's no pressure really within those pipes. Okay, well, we're not going to pull the pump apart. We can chuck that to one side for now. Reservoir is pretty self-explanatory. Let's pull apart the rack. And I want to get the rack shaft taken out. I want to do a DTI run out check on the rack very quickly. Did that in the last video actually as well. And I want to get the rotary control valve out and talk about that. Okay, going to need some tools. Right, we're going to need, let's get all these pipes off first of all. So 12, 14 maybe? Yep. See what you can find while I pull this apart. What do we got? Okay, let's get rid of this great big pipe first of all then. So there's a 12mm there by the looks of it. If you want to pull that off, and I'm going to undo that one there, look. Yep. Twice as quick. Two mechanics in one go. Great, isn't it? Oh, nearly. It is. My fault. Let's give it off. Give it a look. Pretty tight. Yeah. Magic hammer to the rescue. Jeez. I'll pull it across a little bit, will it? There, try that. Try again then, pull it out, stick it on that mount there, look. It's a bit more direct, isn't it? Okay. Right, if you hold that while I just slacken this off. Yep. Ta-da. And you wonder why there's no feeling in my hand anymore. Okay. Stick it back where it was. There we go. Alright, so you've undone that one without me even watching. There we go. So that is the pressure feed disconnected from the rotary control valve. So inside this tube is the rod, just like in the normal steering rack. But this one has a piston in the middle. That piston's got a seal like most pistons, and with the rack being in the central position now, the piston's going to be around about this position here. And it means we've got two chambers. Chamber on this side and a chamber on this side. And if the vehicle is steered, I think on this one, that direction, if we want the rack to move that way, that would be right. Can't do right upside down. Is that right? It's there, isn't it? Yep. And that would be for the vehicle to steer left. So if the vehicle needs to steer right, and there's a resistance at the wheels, so you need power assistance, the torsion bar inside the rotary control valve will flex, and that'll open the ports in there more to a point where they'll be fully open. We get pressurized fluid flowing down this pipe here, you can see that on the camera, which comes down and flows down that pipe into this chamber. Now all these pipes are always full of fluid, they're just not always full of pressurized fluid. That's the thing you've got to bear in mind. There's never any air in the system. So that pressurized fluid enters this chamber, and this volume has to increase. Now it can't, you know, the walls of this cylinder are fixed, it's not going to move those, and there's a seal at this end, so that again stops the fluid leaking out, hopefully. So the only thing that can move is the rack. Okay, and if the rack moves that way, then the vehicle will steer to the left. And if the rack moves that way, the vehicle will steer to the right. So if the vehicle needs to turn left under power steering, we get pressurized fluid forced into this chamber here, and the piston has no choice but to move in that direction. If the vehicle needs to turn the other way, then of course the fluid is forced out down the other pipe into this chamber, and the same thing happens. That piston then gets moved in that direction. Now you may ask me, what happens, Andy, to the fluid on the other side of the piston?
What happens, Andy, to the fluid on the other side of the piston?
Well, I'm pleased you asked that, because as that piston moves, remember I said earlier on that the chamber's still full of fluid.
Yeah.
That fluid is forced back through the rotary control valve, through a port, back to the reservoir.
Wow.
It's clever stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
So in theory, you shouldn't get any leaks. We always get a pressurized side and a side that's been evacuated, I suppose you could call that. The fluid's been forced out and goes back to the reservoir. So in theory, your reservoir level should never change. Yeah?
Yeah.
It should always stay the same level. Apart from when the whole thing warms up or cools down, then you get fluid expansion, but that's a whole different ballgame. Okay, so inside this rack, we're expecting to find, on the rack, a piston. Now, if that seal on the piston has failed, then that pressurized fluid that comes into, say, this chamber here is going to leach across into the non-pressurized side, and we're going to get less assistance. So your steering might be really heavy, but there's no external leaks.
Yeah.
Yeah? So that's, again, a common problem with power steering racks. Okay, so all we need to do now to strip this thing down is we'll take these two pipes off, we'll take the gaiters off. There should be a big nut at one end, I'm not sure which end it'll be. We'll take the nut off, we'll get the yoke taken out, which is just there. Remove the yoke, and then we'll undo the big nut down here, and hopefully we can withdraw that rotary control valve.
Cool.
It's pretty easy, eh?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we're going to need a spanner to fit on these. What have we got? 13, 14 maybe?
Let's try 14.
You try a 14 on there. Right, you do those, and I'll do the ones on the rotary control valve. Oh, you've got the right size spanner as well. So good. There we go. It's always a good idea to check these for, you see here, look, where they've been rubbing together.
Yeah.
Over time, eventually that will be a leak. It would, like with brake pipes and stuff,
Yeah,
you know, it would cause
I've
it to...
encountered that before.
Yeah, where there should always be a gap between brake pipes.
Yeah.
Otherwise...
Particularly bad on old brake pipes on Mustangs.
Really? Are they
Yeah.
bad for it?
Yeah.
Is that just because there's not enough clips on the chassis, or what?
It's the
Or they've been changed over the years?
excessive wear, and yes, the different setups.
Yeah. I suppose if they're replaced, some mechanics don't actually mount them as well as, or shape them maybe as well as they should do.
No.
Yeah. And Mustangs, they're all pretty old, so they're bound to have had new brake pipes at some point.
Yeah.
Bloody good. Right. There you go. And on these banjo fittings, you'll come across some little copper washers, yeah?
Yep.
So if you have a look at those, just like with a normal brake banjo, you've got a copper washer that sits either side of the actual banjo joint itself. So you've got to make sure that you replace those whenever you put the whole thing back together. You should replace them. You shouldn't be reused again. Okay, so those pipes need to be inspected and checked that they're not corroded. Right, I think we should take this mounting off. So you've got a 14 there, and there's probably one. Is there one around that side as well or not? No, it's not. It's just a bendy one. So 14 spanner or socket on there and get that cracked off. Heave. It's really tight. Is it really a 14 or a 13? It looks soft. It looks a bit. Oh no, you're right. Go on. Bloody good. Professional. Now this particular rack, whilst Holly's doing the mount, your mountings are actually something you need to check as well. If there's play in the mounts, then the rack, when you try and steer the vehicle, rather than move the wheels, the rack will move in the opposite direction, the actual body of the rack, and you'll get play in your steering when you're driving down the road.
Yeah.
Have you changed any of those before on the steering rack? I suppose most of yours are steering boxes, aren't they?
On the older vehicles, yes.
Yeah, all steering box, American stuff. Yeah. Toyotas are pretty good. All this stuff's original on here, and this vehicle was 1996. It's what, 21 years old.
Older than me.
You know, older than you. Older than you. Holy shit. God, I feel old now. Right. So that's actually a one-piece mount. So it doesn't actually come apart, does it? It's all welded together. So I suppose you just got to splay that a bit. There we go. And that's the bush that you'd check, or you have to replace if there was movement on it. That one's pretty good actually, considering how old it is. Good stuff. Just in the rack there, look, that's the other bush. That one you need to press out with a press. It's pretty well held in there. So I'll give it a good inspection. This one does need to be replaced if you're going to reuse this rack, but for us it's going to go in the bin. It's always pretty good, isn't it? Chucking things in the bin afterwards. Takes the pressure out of it. Okay, so the next job is to remove those boots. So we'll chuck it back in the vise. Completely illegally. Everybody tell us now, putting it in the vise like that. Right. Okay, so Mr. Boot. How are they held in? What have we got? Little star screwdriver. There you go, Holly.
Thank you.
See the years of experience coming through now, can't you? Not really.
Yes, knowing a screw really shows how much experience.
Have they taught you how to do you remember back in class? Because you used to be one of my students, didn't you?
Yeah.
I miss those days. We never got any work done. Now, this is your track rod end, and this bit we call the rack end. And you've got two joints. You've got one there, which is seized up, and you've got one here as well. And the test for that, remember what the test was? It has to be able to hold its own weight. So when you put it in position, it should be stiff enough to maintain that position. That's sort of the rule of thumb test. Because there's so much, because it's a hydraulic system, there's so much force on that rack. You can't, unless it's really, really bad, you can't feel the play.
Yep.
So we always say, look, you know, if it doesn't hold its position, it's a fail.
Yep.
That's a fail. What's yours like?
Fail.
Fail. Damn. No good. You could also try it without the track rod end on, but I think these are so sloppy it'd still be a fail.
Yep.
Because obviously it adds a lot more weight to the end, doesn't it, having it on? Okay, so if you finish off pulling your boot off, there's some pliers there for that little clip. And then we'll get those boots just pulled back out of the way.
Devil clips these.
Okay, and on the other video I've shown you how to remove the track rod end, so we won't bother doing that today. Right, so we're going to need to try and give it a twist as you're doing it. There you go, you got it? And that should eventually go end up all the way down there. Get it over that little step. They're a bit stiff sometimes. You got it? Cool. So, with it being a steering system, it's really important that nothing comes undone. Yeah, because you crash and like, it would catch fire and you'd burn and die, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Pretty much. So these rack ends are held onto the rack shaft with these washers. Now the washers on the inside are key to the shaft. They've got like a little tab, and then you bend them over on these flats, so it's mechanically locked into place. Plus you use shitloads of thread lock as well. Yeah. Because you don't want them coming loose. It would be really, really bad. Most drivers would realise, knock, 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 there's something wrong with my steering. Some drivers wouldn't do anything about it until the wheels stopped turning in the right direction, and it would just veer off the motorway and.
Yep.
All right. So as a mechanic, we've got to make sure it's right. So we've got to bend those tabs back first, and then we've got to get some big monkey wrench on there or something, and get that undone. So you're going to need eye protection, I think, just over there, and we're going to need a hammer and a flat chisel, I think. And you'd always put new washers on. And whenever you buy a new rack end, you get a new one of these with it. Yep. You should do. If the supplier doesn't supply it, somebody else has nicked it out of the box, basically. Right. Grease. Okay. So we're going to need a hammer and a flat chisel. Where did I put the... Oh, hammer's up there, look. Top of the toolbox. Right, you wearing protection?
Yes, I am.
Excellent, that's what we like. Okay, well you can do this bit. Yeah, look, you can just hammer, put your punch on, your chisel on there, and see if you can flatten that off. While I risk life and limb. Is it working? Yeah, we're about there, aren't we? Right, if I flick it over. Do the other one because it's got two. It came out of there. Excellent. That's what you wear eye protection. You're not old enough to know that. Right then. You're right, she says. Okay, coming back your way a bit.
Sure.
Are you ready? It's probably going to squirt again. Hang on, we can do this properly. We can do this controlled, Mr. Young. There, look. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. Go on, give it a proper one.
I'm really bad for smacking things like a bitch.
It's not my hand, I'm not bothered. Perfect. Okay. So now we should be able to, hopefully, should be able to get the big monkey wrench on there. And if this won't go on, we're going to have to bray that down a bit more. Bray is a Yorkshire. You heard bray before?
No.
Oh, bray is when you hit something really hard. You bray it. Normally at the pub, when somebody upsets you. Right, so we're going to have to bray that some more. So try and get a flat round punch. We'll just do that. Mutilate it. Same on the other side. Right, mutilation coming up. There we go. Right. Oops, sorry, made a mess. Right. Okay. You going to pull on that for us? You got it. Oh, look at that. You're good. I can see you actually work in a workshop. Cool. So we can get rid of that one. And we know we need a new one of those, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now spin it round. In fact, I'll just post this on. Cool. Now this one we're going to pull down, aren't we? Okay. Now there is actually a space we can put another spanner on there to hold the rack, but we're lazy. So if you want to push down on that, I'll hold the rack if I can. So good. Excellent job. Coolio, we're getting there now, aren't we? Looking a lot less than it was earlier on. Okay. So what we've got left on here now, we've still got the rotary control valve, we've still got the rack shaft. We need to remove that big nut later, and that will be underneath there, that's like a cover. There'll be another nut we have to undo, and that, then we can pull out the rotary control valve. Remember what's under there? Under that bit?
The yoke.
Yeah, the yoke. Remember what the yoke does?
Nope.
Good. It's not breakfast. Okay, so the next job is, there should be, yes there is, right, just down there look, can you see a circlip?
Yep.
So that circlip holds in basically a bush and a seal. So we've got under the circlip, and it's also got a couple of flats on it. You can see those flats there, look? So it might even be threaded in. So we're going to have some fun getting that out there. Toyota will have a special tool for that.
Improvise.
Somebody's here. I wonder who could be here. Right. So let's do that first, I think. No, Roger will go on first. Let's do that first. Okay, so we need to get that big nut undone. So you want your big spanner again. Big adjustable spanner. There we go. Okay. And be careful because you're going to run out of room there, aren't you? It's going to be an oddball one to get undone.
Yep.
You have to go one. Yeah, maybe I can help from this side. Right, you want to adjust it up. I always do it the wrong way. Do you always do that as well?
Yeah.
Always,
Yeah.
always wind it the wrong way. Never the right way first time. Right, you ready? Oh, it's not too bad. Man, you're going to be able to teach the guys at work so much after today, aren't you? You're like, you know, give me the power steering wheel, I'll strip it down for you. I know what I'm doing. Andy showed me. Then they're going to watch the video and go, yeah, right. Now there shouldn't be a spring under there. It should be only the yoke has a spring. So this should just be an inspection, like an access port, to get to that lower nut on the pinion, or rotary control valve actually. There you go. Oh, look at that. Is there a nut? There should be a nut. There is a nut. Nut and grease. Okay. Right, let's get rid of the yoke while we've got your big spanner. We're just so on the yoke, we've got the lock nut, which is a weird square shaped thing, and then we've got this big, like an Allen key type nut, having a cap head on there. So if you adjust your monkey wrench, just suit that big flat on the square nut, and we'll get that undone first. There you go, and it's got to come towards you, isn't it? Jeez, you're good. Just enough power there. It's perfect. None of this flying across the workshop. Bits everywhere. Blood and all sorts.
No, I leave that for everybody else.
Oh,
Most of the time.
do they hurt themselves quite a bit, do they? There's a lot of swearing and like, whack.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Right. Now, I might have, looking at that, I might have a motorbike thing that'll fit in there.
When I do it, I just stand there and think about how much of an idiot I am.
Oh, you're not an idiot. Just have a look in that top left-hand drawer in this third toolbox. Is there one in there? maybe. No. It'll do. It's not the right size. I'll say it's a 22, but we can't get to that. This is meant for motorcycle front forks, the wheel spin. It'll work. Right, so, spanneroonie. Is there 17 out? Is that one? 17? Cool. So that'll go on there. That should go in there. Oh, it's loose, yeah. There you go. Now remember what's under that? Oh, oil. What's under there?
A spring?
Correct. That's like a jack in the box. Doing. It wasn't too springy, was it?
No. Not at all.
Cool. Okay, well, that's good news. Right. So we've got. Oh yeah. There's this bit disappointing, that wasn't it really? I was hoping for a bit more than that. Right. Off that screwdriver. Here's one I actually cleaned earlier. And can we get Mr. There we are, look. Mr. Yoke. Now Mr. Yoke, he is a wearing part. I'm assuming it's a bloke. Might not be. So you can see in there, like you've got this like a nylon-y type material, but it looks pretty unworn, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah.
And there'll be measurements for that, and they can't wear very much because otherwise it'd be down to the metal. You see, look.
Yep.
There's the yoke, and now we can see inside there the continuation of the rack shaft. Okay, and that should. Yeah, look.
Yep.
There goes the spurt. Right. Okay. Nut. What size do you reckon that is?
I reckon that is a
Go on.
14.
A what?
14?
Definitely not. Go bigger.
That doesn't quite look like a 17.
Try it.
Yeah, that was right.
Bloody is. Right. That was your turn to spurt that time. Right. 17 socket. Sorry, this has gone way beyond normal YouTube. Okay. Right. That's the fluid that will be returning to the reservoir if it had been connected.
Yep.
Right, you should be able to do that now. Hopefully. I'll do oil limitation. There we go, look. You know you've got oil on your forehead now as well.
Do I?
I don't know how the hell you manage that. You must have gone, oh, this is so
Always end up with oil and grease all over me.
stuff. Okay, so that should now, hopefully, I can pull one of these back springs. Not a power steering rack. So under here, this is just the gate we took that off out of the way. Okay, well, under there, I wonder if it's just gonna. I would say there's gonna be a circlet. They're not gonna rely on just the box, surely. And they're all a little bit different. Oh, I can see a circle. God, I'm good at it. I wing it every time. You got oil in your eye? Good, because we get told off for not wearing eye protection, don't we? Right, so we need some more circuit pliers. Holly, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Circuit pliers. Extraordinaire. Cool. Well, that's the wrong way, isn't it? That's the opening out. So that's what we need. You gonna do this?
Yep.
Well then, show me your skills. So I know they're in there. I've seen them once.
Once.
This is where you fire the circle across the workshop, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, one more. I'll try and get under it. Oh yeah. Go on, keep going. Bingo. Team effort. Good job. Okay, now that circlip's out, we should, I think, be able to, with our magic hammer, be able to tap that up. I'm going to need an extra bit. What's that punch now? Okay, you ready? Hopefully, you said. Go on, you can do it. You obviously got the knack. I'll just catch the bits that fly out.
Taking that.
Yeah. Should have told you before. Oh, it's moving. Keep going. Bloody good. Cool. Right, so what we've got there, which is very cool, apart from loads of more oil, give it a seal. Right, so we've got a bearing there as well. Get rid of the bearing. It's rather a snap bearing. Okay, so that was sat in there like that, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. So you've got, if you look at the various ports, that port there, which was, I think that was the return to the reservoir, wasn't it? That one. And that was the pressure feed. And these two went either side of the piston, I think. So it looks like the pressure feed goes to the top. It will go in through these ports here, look.
Yep.
And, sorry, pressure feed here. So the pressure feed comes into this middle groove here, and that's the returns. The return comes through those little holes out, back to the reservoir. And inside here, can you see there's a little pin just on there? It looks like it's been taken out actually. A little pin there.
Yep.
There's another pin there.
Yep.
This component here, inside there, is the torsion bar. So if we put this in the vise, we'll put, because this is aluminium vise, we can get away with it. We'll put the pinion gear, this one, in the vise, and we'll clamp some mole grips or something onto there, and we'll actually be able to see it flex.
Yep.
Remember we did that in class? Yeah. Cool. Oakley, right, so being aluminium jaws in this special vise, we can put the pinion. I have to say that every time because people tell me off putting things in the vise. It's a really special vise. Honest. That'll do it that way. And then we're completely away from even the bolts that hold the aluminium in place.
Yep.
And if you look in the toolbox behind you, there should be some big mole grips. You see any? Some vice grips. Sorry, English. Okay, so just to prove what I'm on about, because I'm not going to be able to drill out those bits because they're really quite hard. Just to prove that this part of the shaft is not the same component as the bottom part, it's linked by that torsion bar.
Yep.
Just give that a pull. Yeah, can you see it moving around?
Yep.
And you can do it this way as well. So even though the pinion's not moving at all, that's actually turning on the torsion bar.
Yep.
And can you imagine if I took that out of the vise, because because the device at the moment is offering maximum resistance, i.e. it can't move at all. That would be the same as your tyre being against the curb on the car. If I take that out and I offer that very little resistance with my fingers, can you see the torsion bar doesn't flex at all?
Yep.
So when the torsion bar is not flexing, it doesn't open those ports at all.
Yep.
So you don't get any power assistance. The hydraulic fluid doesn't get transferred down to the piston.
Because it's not required.
Yeah, because it's not required. The harder it is to turn the steering on the car, the more that torsion bar will flex and the more pressurised fluid it will transfer to the chamber in the rack.
Yep.
So it looks after itself basically. And it's all done mechanically. It's not done, there's no electronics, there's no electrical valves or anything like that. It's all done just through that twisting of that torsion bar. And maybe I'll do another video just covering how this rotary control valve really works and how the fluid travels through. But you can see here, hopefully, where's my little pointy stick? That'll do. So the pressurised fluid comes in through ports in the casting to this central groove here. And you can see we've got seals between each of these chambers. So that's a chamber there, that's a chamber, that's a chamber. And believe it or not, this is another chamber here, but this is a low pressure chamber. All right. So your pressurised fluid comes in, and depending on which way that torsion bar flexes, i.e. which way you're trying to steer the car, it'll either direct the fluid through these little ports, they'll line up when it twists. It'll either come out here into this groove, and it'll go off down one of the pipes to one side of the piston in the rack, or it'll get directed into this groove here, and it'll go to the other side of the piston. So that's how it diverts the fluid based on that rotary action as it's twisting. And this one here, whichever one's getting pressurised fluid, to say if it's turned and the pressurised fluid gets directed to here, this chamber, which is linked to the other side of the piston, those ports open and allow that fluid then to drain back to this side, and that goes back to the reservoir. So it's pretty easy stuff. But if you actually pull one apart, it's really cool because you can drill these pins out, one there and that one there, and this actually separates. You can actually pull it apart and you can see the torsion bar inside. And one little trick, if you want to, see if you've got like an old grandma that needs more power assisted steering, she can't turn the steering wheel too much. If you pull this apart, and it's completely illegal this, but if you pull it apart and grind down the torsion bar a little bit, so it's a bit thinner, it'll flex more, it'll flex sooner. And that'll
provide more resistance.
Yeah, you got it. That's right. So that's a little trick you can do with power steering. If you separate these out, get the torsion bar, and just take maybe a millimetre off the torsion bar, or half a mil, whatever, and that will actually increase the amount of power steering that you get based on the resistance at the pinion end.
It's decreasing the integrity of the torsion bar.
Yeah, it's just reducing that. That's bloody good, actually. I won't even bother adding to that. That was perfect. Good job. Okay, I mean your standard stuff as well when you're inspecting these things. You've got to check all these seals are good. You know, they can fail, they can wear out. And we've got another seal actually on the rack piston. So we pull that out next and we'll have a look at that. So you happy with that?
Yep.
Pretty easy explanation?
Yep.
Yeah, I reckon. Cool. Here we go. Right. Another chunk. Done. And there's a bearing down there, look, it's that covered in oil and stuff. So you'd have to check how good that bearing is. Pop it out and check it for play and stuff like that. Okay. Right, so now, in theory, to get that rack shaft out, all we have to do is remove that circlip in there and get that outer bush removed, that component, I suppose you'd call it. Obviously it's got a bush in there and it's got a seal because it's having to seal that hydraulic fluid in there, so it's got to be a really good seal. If you were getting hydraulic fluid leaking out of here, so it was hiding inside the boot, you'd know that seal had failed.
Yep.
And the same goes at this end here. There'll be another seal inside there, which will be actually about here. So if you were getting fluid leaking into that boot, you'd know it with this seal here as well.
Yep, but you can't repair those nowadays. You get a whole new.
Pretty much. It's not actually viable anyway, because chances are there are other parts in there that are worn. They're all getting a bit tired anyway.
Yep.
You just order a new rack, don't you? Garages don't pull them apart. And that's why I thought doing a video would be pretty cool, because you don't often see inside one anymore.
No.
Yeah. Only Unitech teach this kind of stuff. Little dig there. Right then. Okay. So we need to pop that into the vise. Let's see if we can get that circle out.
Be funny for any Unitech students watching that.
Yeah, right. Okay, so squeezy shut circlip pliers. They're the ones. Oakley dokley. Right. Little flat screwdriver. Backup screwdriver. Okay, if you want to get in there and do the old circlipy thing. Oh, you are so good. Cool. All right. Bloody hell. Maybe you'll be ticking off my videos soon. Right then. I'll be in the pub. So, I'm not sure if that's threaded or not, but we can easily find out by just having a go at removing the rack. Because it might just push that out with it, you know? Yeah. Ooh, bearing. That's the bearing we're going to test. That was easy to get out, wasn't it? Right. Yeah, I knew that all the time. I was just seeing if you could remember what to do.
Yeah.
That's always a trick of a lecture, you know, because we haven't got a clue what we're doing half the time. Right, so. What have we got there? Well, we've got the bush. Yeah?
Yep.
See the bush in there, look?
Yep.
That black thing. So that's obviously preventing movement on the rack side to side. Because if we get movement on there, it's going to stress the seal, but it's also going to affect your steering. It's going to give you wibbly wobbly steering. So we've got the bush, we've got a spacer, that's just a seal support, so to speak. We've got the seal, that's a hydraulic seal. So that can cope with 1250 psi.
Yep.
1250 psi. And then, all we've got here is the rack. And the only difference between this and the rack that you find in a non-power steering rack system is it's got this piston and a seal. So if you hold that, I'll bring the old one that Sam took apart and we can have a look. Okay, so this is the rack that came out of the that Nissan Sentra, the non-power steering rack.
Yep.
That's the one we've just taken out of the power steering rack out of the RAV4. And can you see just how similar they are? There's really not a lot of difference at all, other than this one's got a piston.
Yep.
That's the only difference, really. So with this piston, let's spin it around. Here we go. Look. Can you see there's a seal, a black seal in the middle there? Look.
Yep.
And this one doesn't have any gap. It's not split, so you can't just like ping it off. You couldn't spread it like a piston ring and take it off.
Yep.
On this particular rack, these two halves, this whole shaft is made up of two halves, and in the middle there will be a thread. So you can lock it off either end, so you've got places where you put your spanner on.
Yep.
And you can actually undo that and take the seal off. On some of them, not all of them. The ones that you can't do that, they'll have a split seal. But normal garages nowadays just don't do this kind of stuff. You can't, you know, a garage wouldn't be able to order a piston seal for a RAV4. It's just non-existent. Total wouldn't even sell them one. They'd only want to sell them a full rack.
Yep.
Joke. How many racks in the picture? And it's not one. Okay, what was your joke?
I can't.
You can't remember?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right, so I'll go and grab the V-blocks and the DTI. We'll get set up and we'll do a quick run-out check on this rack shaft and make sure it's still in spec.
Cool.
See if there's any deviation on it anyway. Okay? Coolio. Right, so the rack's all set up with the V-blocks. All we need to do is zero the DTI, which you can do because you're a professional. I'm all over the place. Fidgety, isn't it?
Yep.
Needs that woman's touch. Yeah, I reckon you're there. Oh, you nearly had it then. Jesus.
Keeps going out.
Yeah, that's near enough. Okay, right, do you want to rotate the rack really slowly? That's this one, by the way. Really slowly. Let's see what we get. And we're going to measure the deviation both sides, aren't we?
Yep.
Okay, so we're up to 3, 4. Oh, almost 1 that way. Nearly 1. Okay, it's not too bad. So it's 0.045. 0.045, which is minuscule.
Yep.
So it's pretty good, actually. Really chuffed with that. So if we were to put it back together again, we could use that part of the component. It's a pass. It wasn't bent. It wasn't my driving. This video is way too much fun. Anyway. So we've done the rack shaft and a quick run out check on it, and it was 0.045 approximately on run out, which is well within tolerance. It was basically wasn't bent at all, and I didn't expect it to be because the steering on the vehicle wasn't causing any problems, other than when you go around corners too fast. Then it didn't work very well. So before we sign off, I thought it'd be really quite good to clarify the fluid flow through the system when you're turning in one direction or the other. So I'm going to do a quick diagram just to summarize, and then we'll sign off. Here we go. In fact, are you ready for this?
Yep.
Do you want to draw it?
No.
I didn't think so. Okay, so completely off the cuff, power steering system. Right, doing this from memory now. So we obviously have to have a reservoir, right?
Yep.
So we'll start with the easy stuff. We've got a reservoir up here, and that reservoir on this particular, it has 2 pipes, one either side, and we've got the rack, which we'll just draw as a tube. There, look. And we know we've got basically a seal at each end. So you can draw the seal in black if you want, just across the end.
Yep.
We don't need to worry too much about the rack shaft at the moment because we're looking more at fluid than we are. So one down here, look as well. We'll seal that off. So there's your rubber seals. Obviously, your rack shaft is sticking through those at either side. And in the middle, we've got a piston. There's your piston. Okay. And we've got a pump. So we'll just do a little circle for pump. And from there, we also had the rotary control valve. And the rotary control valve, we can forget the pinion gear for now, because the actual power steering side of it has nothing to do with the pinion gear, other than that provides a resistance for the torsion bar to move,
Yep.
or to flex, should I say. So we'll put the rotary control valve up here, and the rotary control valve had a return to the reservoir, so we can use that one there as the return. So if you can put me an arrow in black pointing to my left on there, cool. So that fluid always goes back to the reservoir. All right. Now this one is the feed to the pump. So we've got it's just a supply of fluid to the pump. I hope this diagram's going to work out okay. Right, and then from the pump we had one pipe coming out, which is the high pressure pipe. And that high pressure pipe would go to the rotary control valve, and it was sort of the second one down in height on the rotary control valve. So we'll stick that on that side there. I think it went on the other side, but it doesn't matter. It's only a diagram. Okay, so the fluid from the pump to the rotary control valve always goes in that direction, so you can put an arrow to my left in black on that one. That's cool. And the fluid from the reservoir, put an arrow there, look, reservoir, always goes to the pump, so you can put an arrow to my right in there. Perfect. So good. Right. And then out of the rotary control valve, we had 2 more pipes that ran across the top of the tube, remember?
Yep.
So one of them goes to this chamber, and one goes to that chamber, so I can put a couple of little sort of nipply things on there. And that wasn't a joke, really. Okay. And we'll have a pipe onto there, and we can have another pipe that runs down there. Now what you can't do with these is we can't put any direction, because the fluid on those 2 pipes can flow in either direction depending on which one's getting the pressurized fluid and which one's draining out. Okay, so let's say we want the rack, and I'll draw the rack in, what the hell, I'll draw the rack in there. So there's your rack, the rack shaft, there look. running through. I've not drawn the pinion, which would normally sit there, and I've not drawn the pinion teeth. But let's say we want the rack to move that way, in that direction. I'm not going to use left and right because it's all going to be upside down on the camera. Let's say if we want the rack to go in that direction there, look. Do you think we're going to need to put pressurised fluid in that chamber or this chamber to get the piston to move that way?
Pressurised fluid in that chamber.
You're on it. Good job. Kill the fly. Hate flies. Right. So, if we want the rack to go that way, and we don't know whether, it doesn't matter whether it's left or right, it makes no difference. If you want to put me an arrow in that pipe there, coming down to this chamber. Cool. So basically, inside the rotary control valve, through that valving mechanism, the fluid is being transferred from the pump to that pipe there. Right, we're not going to go into the complexities of the actual valving inside, but that's the job that it's doing. So now we've got, we've already got fluid in this chamber, but it's not pressurized. Now we've got pressurized fluid being applied to that chamber. The fluid, it can't expand the sidewalls of the cylinder, and it's not going to blow past unless the pressure gets too high. It's not going to blow the seal out. The easiest thing for it to do to increase the volume of that chamber is to push the piston along this way. So pressurized fluid enters that chamber. The fluid inside the chamber now pressurizes and it increases in volume, and the piston has to go in this direction here. Now don't forget, we've got a lot of fluid still in this chamber here, but it's not pressurized. So as that piston moves across and that volume reduces, that fluid, some of it at least, gets pushed back out through this pipe. So you can put an arrow on there if you want, going up, and that gets pushed back into the rotary control valve. And there's a second set of valves that are open that allow that fluid to run through the valve and back to the reservoir. So with your black pen, if you just draw a line from here to here, there you go. Cool. So the fluid's going to run out of that chamber as that chamber's volume reduces, and it's going to head up that pipe through the rotary control valve, through the various ports that are open, and return back to the reservoir. So in theory, the reservoir's height shouldn't really change, because as the volume of fluid in this chamber increases, proportionally, exactly the same volume of fluid will leave this chamber. And if you get air in the system, say for example you let the reservoir run low and you get air going into the pump will start to make some pretty weird noises, and you'll also get fluid eventually air ending up through the rotary control valve and into here as well, and you'll get sort of springy steering and you won't get very much assistance. Just like with your brakes, if you get air in the brake fluid,
Spongy.
really spongy and hardly any effort is applied to the brakes, is it? Now obviously if the rack needs to go in the other direction, the whole thing is reversed as regards from the rotary control valve to the rack. The direction of the fluid to the pump is still the same. The pressurized fluid out of the pump is still the same. It's just the direction of these two, the fluid in these two pipes that flicks over.
Yep.
Yeah. When the vehicle's going straight ahead and you're not having to change the steering, so the position of the piston doesn't really move, then what happens to the pressurized fluid from the pump is it's just directed straight back to the reservoir. It just cycles round and round and round. And there you go. That's how it works.
Cool.
So there you go, power steering. Very simple explanation of a power steering system using a power steering rack. Power steering boxes, a little bit different internally, well quite different internally. They do still have rotary control valves, still got a power steering pump, still have a reservoir, but the way that or where the piston is inside this power steering box is very, very different. And when I get hold of a power steering box, I'll do a video on it, because I haven't got one at the moment. So if somebody wants to send me a power steering box, then I'll do a video on it. There you go. It's been a long day's filming, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It really has. I mean, we started at what time did you rock up? I was outside for 9. No, 9:15. You rocked up at
10:30 or something?
10:30, yeah. Less said about that the better, I reckon. And it's nearly 5 o'clock. So there you go, people. It does take a long time to put videos together. We've made 2 videos today. The first one was, geez, I've forgotten already. Man, I am getting old. It was a really long video. Oh, gearbox. We did that was the one. Manual transaxle.
Yep.
Pulled it all apart and stuff, and then we did this video. So it's taken all day really to film 2 videos, and it is hard work, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm knackered now. Are you knackered? She's not knackered. I've seen her knackered in class, and it's not this. All right, crew. Well, thank you for watching. Hope you found the video helpful. If you did, then there you go. You're on the spot now.
You can subscribe.
Camera's still running, go.
Yeah. You can subscribe to Andy Mechanic on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Google+.
That's right. And if you want to subscribe on YouTube, click on the YouTube symbol just up there somewhere, and you'll see a little gear icon turn up. You can click on the gear icon, and then you can turn on notifications. And then our best mates down at YouTube, and they do look after me really well. Very impressed with the support that they give me. Tick the box. They'll send you an email as and when I upload any new videos. So you get a notification, and then you can decide if you want to watch it or not. Maybe Holly will be in there in the video. Maybe she won't. Maybe it's Sam. Maybe it's Harley. Or maybe I'll be all on my own. All right, crew. Thanks for watching. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. Over and out.